women in a circle chanting. That yellow dress has scared the bejesus out of me. Kerosene and mud, she would later write in her journal. Goat skins, the number 5. These memories of my mother's preschool and elementary years stayed buried for 4 decades. And what manner of self-preservational mechanism can do that? And what circumstances lead that buried history to erupt? To wake one morning to a new station on the dial, transmissions from an undiscovered galaxy that was always there inside one's head. Call them forgotten or repressed or displaced or pushed aside, the appropriate vocabulary remains contested. A phenomena, the validity of which more than a few deny, often for a good reason. But not here, not in this case. This happened, she knows it, and I witnessed it, saw the effects of the memories bursting through in all their violence. Nor did my grandmother deny it. During her last days in a nursing home, when my mother could no longer visit or speak to her, my father confronted my grandmother, told her of the therapy her daughter was going through, of these recovered memories, like when the chimney caught on fire and they left her locked in her room upstairs, the firemen having to retrieve her through the window. And my grandmother not denying it, she was never in any harm. Then there are the letters my mother wrote, notes and poems. She hid them in the house, age 7, 11, secreted them in the backs of picture frames, quickly forgotten, surfacing 40 years later. At their peak, these recovered memories were relentless. 3 or 4 a week at times. Happenings of singular brutality, surreal psychological manipulation, physical punishments, humiliations, her mother primarily, but to a lesser extent her grandfather too, and that one cousin, Raymond. Hard for me not to be morbidly fascinated by the horror show. In offering up my mother's testimony, my aim is not simply to share the grotesqueries of her Finger Lakes girlhood, but to present a survival narrative, a testifying, to document her ability to weather, not always successfully, that unasked-for rewriting of identity, to invoke Gerald Visner's term, a survivance tale, moving beyond sheer survival so as to climb into some kind of metamorphosis, albeit uneven. This is also a gesture of thanks, for by all odds my mother could have passed on what she incurred, mimicked and delivered such lessons to her own children, and ruining my life, my sister's in turn. But for whatever reason, she swallowed that family curse, let it die inside her as best she could, took the bullet. She's got the scars, they have never healed, but she has kept them hers. Cells lost, forgotten, they wander back in as if they own the place. Rogue familiars. Where did you come from? Little detail. There's another section from this beginning opening section, jumping ahead. Some of you are reading along, so I'm on page 12 right now. Should you like, it's a hymnal. Open up your hymns to page 12, please. That partial gallery, Edward Hopper afternoons, Grantwood barns, somber and benign, the muted hues of straw and country plaid. I don't know if you know by the area, but if you travel throughout the Finger Lakes area, you can still, I mean, it's a fascinating area, and you can still, without too much effort, travel off a road and find yourself in a dirt road, and you find yourself very quickly going by, school bus chassis in a front yard and a goat tied to a tree, and kids running around in their underwear and so forth, and which is not unique to the Finger Lakes area, but but this is even before then. It was much more rural there. Only to find older paintings beneath the pigment, tableaus and blood and mustard, every thorn and glare, each curled lip rendered in a Francis Bacon hand. My mother would call me on the phone when the memories erupted, and I'd write them down. The unfolding spectacle, the shame of it. Because it's about us humans. We do this to our young. It's not about some alien species of monkey or bat viewed through a telephoto lens. Whatever draw any atrocity narrative has stems in part from the unsettling awareness that these characters are cut from the reader's shared cloth. And to have no say in this spontaneous regeneration. The most banal events would cue them. She'd spill coffee on her blouse, and it would trigger a new film loop of her mother holding her mouth open, forcing her to drink hot coffee. Or she'd reach for the ironing board and would be transported back to that kitchen in wrinkled dress, ready for school, her mother's voice, "You're not going anywhere like that, get over here." And then her mother ironing the dress with her still in it. ointments later applied to the burns. Arriving sharp and undistorted, breaking through with icy clarity, core samples pulled from the bowels of the brain, molecules tasting air after eons, branches of the neural forests lighting up like Christmas trees, unsolicited intruders in their stagecraft. Mom, before your bad memories came haunting, were those childhood years like a forest of new-growth pines, cultivated and sensible roads? And then the vines came, invasive tendrils choking trees, old-growth narratives reclaiming their terrain, making of it a jungle, with nighttime eyes blinking in the shadows. Or maybe mind is akin to a Victorian house of grand proportions, hundreds of doors inside, front doors, cellar doors, attic doors, swinging cat doors cut into back doors, cuckoo clock doors, oven doors, refrigerator doors, bedroom doors behind which are closet doors, within which are dowhouses with tiny trap doors, dumbwaiter doors, laundry chute doors, furnace doors, storm doors, and sub-basement. And my mother carrying a ring of skeleton keys carved from yellow bone, every keyhole mouthing, open me, unlock me. Like Sarah Winchester's labyrinthine mystery house in San Jose, California, the good ghost told her to build faux doors so as to confuse the bad. My mother's personal architects, after all those years, had run out of doors. Such metaphors are my fancies. Ask my mom today what it was like. She'll just say, it wasn't fun. Any tabula rasa can be a palimpsest. Every psychic neighborhood has its haunted districts. And what comes of identity when the ghosts claim to be more us than we are ourselves? When memory returns a half-century late, uninvited, who is the agent of that narrative? Whose hand brushed in ink on sleeping skin? Who knocks? Who opens? Whose house? By the time she passed through adolescence, so many pages in that girl's life were whited out. Stanzas, pages, entire chapters concealed by the shielding censors. Then, decades later, the missing narratives materialize. Memories returning while she slept, moaning in her sleep. She'd wake up my father. A silent kind of screaming, that's what she called it, the soundtrack in her head. Would open her eyes and find the dream still running. She'd still be there, in the garage, the backyard, being beaten or forced to drink whiskey or maybe class thorns, all the et ceteras, the miscellaneous abuse. She would will herself to declare that none of this is happening, just memories, Judy, these are just memories. In such moments, she was in two places at once. A middle-aged woman in a sweat in her bed in Elmira, and simultaneously a 9-year-old girl locked in the attic. Christmas Day, barefoot in her nightgown. It's cold, she can see her breath, she's vomiting, she's hugging herself, she's sitting in a box. Marcel Duchamp coined a term for that liminal, indeterminate state when separate phenomena commingle. Infrathin. This was inframemory. And I think I'll just one more passage, and then we can chat more about it. Maybe later I'll read a little bit out. And I'm jumping ahead to a section in a chapter, and this is a chapter which is focusing on the family. It's a chapter called Kin, in which I talk about different family members and trying to provide bits and pieces of those portraits. But it's also where I introduce the Jemima Wilkinson character, the public universal friend, who wasn't literally family, but we go back and family members along one strain were in her cult, who was a very different kind of person. She was somebody who liked children, especially girls, fairly benign influence. It was actually kind of nutty, obviously. I mean, you have to be, I think, to have a good cult, but seemed, kind of okay. Anyway, this is a passage. I'll just stop with this. This is on page 52 on the bottom. I grow weary of these genealogical excavations, tired of this role of biographer and memoirist, what I've become, rendering my mother's life and bits of my own for the consumption of strangers. Memoir. I've never been comfortable with the genre, all those exhibitionists enabled by their voyeurs. That's a little too harsh. I'm not. But I was feeling it on the day I wrote that sentence. So. All those renderings of trauma and tragedy, followed by the obligatory redemption. Still, this is the form in which I find myself writing. It is something, by the way, when I was writing this and struggling, like, how do I pull this together? And so many of these accounts, understandably, are accounts of people who have weathered and dealt with extreme trauma, violence, and I get it, and they need to be there and so forth. But there was a day where I was in a bookstore and was reading the first page of something like, I forget how many of these, and I was just like, and feeling, I have my own conflict, my own issues here with actually participating in this and understanding why it's necessary. But I'm also not personally a reader of this stuff, so that's kind of weird. But what business is it of mine to poke around in these people's lives so, even if I am joined to them by that arcane concept of blood? What right to take such liberties with my mother's history or her family? What to achieve from exposing in scraps and tatters a narrative like hers? It's one thing to reference an 18th century cult leader, the friend from the lands of York State 2 centuries past. Such accounts are long cooked, have aged into the strata of history, their rightful place, the public domain. But my grandmother's life, her parents, were they to appear here now in front of me? Could I even confront them about this? And if not, what cowardice to put it down here safely now that they're gone? Their voices no more, and none left to contest the record. Obviously, this pull to tell is born of some need to acknowledge the work my mother poured into articulating her secret revisionist history. Her freaky tale stayed buried for so long before poking its way through the surface. She labored to pass these accounts along to me and our family, spent too much effort to make clear the details of this occult childhood to let them stay secret. And I suppose it's a purgative gesture, too, on my part, capturing her words here, a means of setting them loose, letting them go, each memory a paper boat, dropped in a river in hopes of being carried away on a current. But there's more to it than that. In making her memories public, parading my relatives for you, reader, maybe I am simply speaking to that primal urge, that embarrassed longing to sustain oneself into perpetuity. Family is such a transitory, ephemeral thing. Whether lucky enough to be born into a beneficent tribe or fated to land with a batch of villains, either way, the collective can only last so long. Ultimately, the negatives will warp and the colors pale, the oral histories mumbling away into silence. Every family has its shelf life. When its time has come and gone, there remain mysterious photos of strangers for subsequent generations to puzzle over. Boxes in an antique store, $3 at the Garrow type. Now I'll just stop there for now. And I guess one thing, too, that I wouldn't mind chatting about, and I know some of you, a number of you have actually read this in the context of a class that has something to do with the teaching of writing and so forth. One of the things that I find, one of the things that actually inspired me to write this was for years having students in first-year writing classes and nonfiction classes and so forth, writing about their lives and their stories and working out different ways where they could kind of testify about the things that they were going through and so forth. And just never having a class where you didn't have accounts that were sensational in really awful ways and also glorious and joyous ways. But when students are doing some version of an oral history of aunts and grandmothers and finding out stories that they had no idea existed, and hearing them talk about the feeling they have and talking with them and somebody's grandmother, it's like, oh, I get to talk about this. And then they start remembering things, and then the stuff gets presented to the students. And so after so many different years of having all of these narratives circulating among my students and reading them, that's going on in the background as I'm doing this. And I think that is what gave me probably more license or permission, I think, to kind of let go and allow myself to kind of do this, is recognizing that I've been working for years with all these 17 and 18-year-olds who are making those various leaps. Not that the classes I teach are not what I would consider confessional. In fact, I want people to be honest and so forth, but I go to great pains saying, listen, if you've got stuff that you feel really nervous about and so forth, talk to me about it, because it's none of my business, it's none of anybody else's business. We need to, so, and also feeling, the difficulty of writing something like this. I never find it easy responding to people when they're writing about trauma and so forth, but there's a real need to respond in the right way. Anyway, that whole kind of event is taking place over the years in the background. I'll stop there and we can maybe chat about this.